Okay, so you're scrolling through the news, right? Economic headlines everywhere, global debates just roaring. How do you actually cut through all that noise? Find the real facts, the truth in what feels like a really heated discussion sometimes.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, isn't it? I mean, the information overload is just immense. And figuring out what's genuinely important versus what's just confusion. It's
Yeah.
tough. That's really why we need to dive deep into the actual arguments people are making.
Exactly. And that's pretty much our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and navigate a really contentious economic topic. We've looked at sources like Facts and Truth, Igniting Debate, and another called USA and India, a cross-cultural podcast dialogue.
Yeah.
So the aim here is to give you a clear, impartial look at both sides.
And what's really interesting about these sources, I think, is how they frame it right away. They basically say, look, this is a major point of disagreement. There are strong reasons why people see this so differently.
Right. So the core topic we're digging into today is this whole debate around tariffs, specifically between the USA and India. And one source, it puts the question very directly, very provocatively. Was former President Trump right to enforce high tariffs on India for the USA's economy? Or, or was he not right? It really forces you to think about the economic impacts from, well, multiple angles.
And just to be clear, our goal isn't to say, this side is right. No, we're pulling out the arguments presented in the material we looked at
Yeah.
so you can understand the nuances, the perspectives from both the USA and India on these tariffs. Think of it like getting those insights you'd expect from that cross-cultural dialogue the sources mentioned.
Yeah, because understanding these dynamics, it's not just for economists, is it? It gives you really significant insights into global economics, political relationships, things that genuinely affect all of us. So let's unpack it, this fundamental question. Was that tariff policy right for the USA's economy or not?
Okay, so maybe first, to really get why it's such a heated debate, it helps to quickly cover what tariffs actually are. Essentially, they're taxes. Taxes imposed on goods coming into a country, imported goods. So when you apply them, foreign products just become more expensive in the local market.
Mhm.
And that whole right or not right question, it really hinges on whether that extra cost is, justified by whatever benefits you're hoping to achieve.
And our sources definitely lay out a clear USA perspective on why you would impose them. From that viewpoint, the argument for high tariffs often comes down to protecting domestic industries and jobs. For instance, the discussion points to worries about certain Indian goods coming in, maybe steel, aluminum priced lower than the American-made versions.
Right.
So the pro-tariff argument goes, make those imports more expensive and U.S. industries can compete better, which could potentially lead to more production here, more jobs in those sectors that were maybe struggling.
And you also see the U.S. perspective focusing on correcting what they might see as a trade imbalance. If the U.S. is importing way more from India than it's exporting to India, tariffs could be framed as a tool, a way to pressure India perhaps to open its markets more to American stuff, or just to shrink that trade deficit. The sources suggest this was a key motivator trying to, quote, level the playing field for American businesses.
It's about leverage, really, trying to tilt the economic balance in a way that's seen as, well, beneficial for the home economy. But obviously, there's always another side to that coin.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the India perspective,
Mm.
which naturally looks at these same tariffs through a completely different economic lens. From India's side, these high U.S. tariffs can look like a direct obstacle, something blocking their export growth. For example, the sources mention potential negative impacts on India's big textile industry, or maybe its agricultural exports. These sectors rely pretty heavily on getting into the American market.
Right, so tariffs make their goods less competitive.
Exactly, which directly hurts Indian producers, Indian farmers.
And it's not just about their exports to the U.S., is it? Tariffs can mean higher costs for Indian consumers, too, especially if India decides to retaliate, right? Puts its own tariffs on American goods. Or maybe India needs certain raw materials or components from the U.S. If those become more expensive because of tariffs, well, that can drive up production costs for Indian manufacturers, makes their finished products less competitive, not just internationally, but even at home.
And what's so fascinating, I think, is how these two viewpoints really spotlight that fundamental tension in global trade. What one country sees as, a necessary protective step, the other sees as a barrier, something blocking free and fair trade. This is exactly why the sources are calling it a trending issue, a
Yeah.
heated debate.
It absolutely is. And you see both sides presenting their case, using what they genuinely see as facts and truth.
Hmm.
Backed up by their own economic data, their own national priorities. The U.S. might point to job numbers in specific American industries,
Mm.
while India might highlight the livelihoods of, say, millions of its small-scale textile workers, or the overall hit to its GDP growth.
And the challenge, then, for anyone trying to understand this, it's reconciling these truths that seem to contradict each other. Each country is prioritizing different economic indicators, different impacts on their society, and that leads them to vastly different conclusions about whether high tariffs are the right call for the U.S. economy or, for global trade generally.
Yeah.
It's a classic case of how economic facts, while factual, can be interpreted so differently depending on where you stand.
So thinking about all this, what does it mean for you as you're trying to make sense of the global economy? This deep dive, I think, has really shown us the core tension in this USA-India tariff debate. It shows how different economic viewpoints just lead to completely different answers on whether high tariffs are a good thing. We've seen how our sources brought out both the USA perspective and the India perspective on this really tricky issue, and each side feels grounded in its own economic reality.
Yeah, and it really brings us back to that core idea, doesn't it? Needing to look for the facts, the truth, inside these really heated arguments. To truly get a handle on complex global stuff like this, you just have to acknowledge there are different views. You have to weigh them. A bit like that cross-cultural podcast dialogue idea the sources mentioned, there's very rarely just one simple side to the story. Understanding the arguments from all angles is just key.
Right. And that kind of leads us to a final thought, something for you to maybe mull over. Given that both sides, in debates like this, often genuinely believe they're operating based on facts and truth, how do you figure out what's truly right? Especially when these policy decisions have such complex ripple effects on totally different economies, different groups of people all around the world. It's definitely a question that invites some ongoing critical thinking long after we finish this deep dive.